The hum of the coffee machine was usually a comforting sound, the backdrop to late-night brainstorming sessions fueled by ambition and cheap pizza. Chloe and I had spent countless hours in my cramped apartment, hunched over laptops, sketching out the future. We were building something, a tech platform we believed would change things, make a real difference. We pooled our meager savings. My $25,000 painstakingly saved from years of freelancing, her $15,000 from family help. Every sacrifice felt worth it, because we were doing it together, best friends since college, tackling the world. Our idea, Connect Local, was simple yet powerful, a hyperlocal social network designed to foster community engagement and support small businesses. I had the initial concept, the technical blueprint, and the early market research. Chloe had the charisma, the networking skills, and a knack for pitching. We were the perfect team. Or so I thought. Before we move forward, please take a moment to give this video a like and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on our next dramatic tale. Your engagement helps us bring more compelling stories like this one to life. The first sign, subtle as a whisper, was the increased secrecy. Late-night calls Chloe would end abruptly. Hushed conversations she'd wave away. Then came the business trip to Silicon Valley she took without me, explaining it was a preliminary scouting mission. Alarm bells, soft at first, began to chime. The full, deafening clang came 2 months later. I received a cease and desist letter. Not from a competitor, but from a company called Ascent Digital, claiming I was infringing on their intellectual property, a platform frighteningly similar to Connect Local, already in beta testing. The CEO listed? Chloe Miller. The CTO? David Chen, a developer she'd recently introduced me to as a potential consultant for our project. They hadn't just gone behind my back. They had stolen our project, my concept, my research, my initial code base, and launched it as their own, leaving me with nothing but debt, a useless prototype, and a gaping wound where trust used to be. My $25,000, my years of work, my friendship, all gone. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was a violation of the deepest kind, a theft of my future and my belief in a person I had loved like a sister. The following months were a blur of grief, anger, and desperate attempts to understand. I consulted lawyers, but the path was steep and costly. They had incorporated quickly, muddied the waters, and had more resources. The initial consultation alone cost me $500 I could barely afford. The emotional toll was immense. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus. The world felt sharp and dangerous. I replayed every conversation, searching for clues I'd missed, signs of the deception hiding in plain sight. The pain was a physical ache in my chest. I felt foolish, naive, utterly broken. Friends and family urged me to fight, to sue, to expose them. And part of me, a raw, wounded part, yearned for retribution. But the thought of years of legal battles, the emotional energy it would consume, felt like letting them continue to steal from me, just in a different way. I was already drained. One evening, utterly exhausted after another sleepless night, staring at the ceiling, a different thought surfaced. What would holding on to this anger do to me? It was a poison, slowly eroding my ability to find joy, to trust again, to move forward. The idea felt radical, almost absurd given the depth of the betrayal. But the alternative, staying trapped in a cycle of bitterness, felt like a life sentence. The decision to forgive wasn't a sudden epiphany, but a slow, arduous climb towards a different perspective. It wasn't about excusing their actions. It was about releasing myself from the bondage of resentment. It was an act of self-preservation. I started seeing a therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Evans, who helped me process the trauma. She explained that forgiveness wasn't about reconciliation, necessarily, but about finding peace within myself, regardless of whether they deserved it or acknowledged the harm they had caused. It was about accepting what happened and choosing not to let it define my future. I journaled. I meditated. I forced myself back into my freelance work, slowly rebuilding my income. I started to re-engage with other friends, cautiously. Each small step away from the pain felt like a victory. My initial intentions regarding Chloe were complex. Forgiveness, in my mind at the time, still held a fragile hope for some form of reconciliation, or at least a conversation where she acknowledged the wrong she had done. I missed the friendship, the shared history. Part of me desperately wanted the person I thought I knew back. I believed that if I could find it in myself to forgive, perhaps it would open a door, however small, to healing the rift, or at least understanding why she did what she did. I naively hoped that my act of letting go of the anger might somehow prompt remorse in her, leading to a difficult but necessary conversation. I believed in the power of redemption, perhaps too much. I thought that by extending grace, I might facilitate a path towards her making amends, not for my money or the stolen idea, but for the broken trust and the profound hurt she had inflicted. It was a fragile hope, born from a deep-seated reluctance to accept that the friendship was truly dead. I yearned for a world where people, even after terrible mistakes, could find their way back to integrity. I had spent the better part of a year focused on rebuilding my own life. Connect Local was a painful memory, a chapter closed. I had started taking on more substantial freelance web development projects and was slowly saving money again. I avoided looking up Ascent Digital, deliberately shielding myself from anything that might trigger the old wounds. I assumed they were thriving, no doubt leveraging my stolen work to build their empire. The thought was a dull throb, but I had learned to live with it. The turning point arrived not through a direct encounter, but through the relentless hum of the internet grapevine. I was scrolling through a tech news aggregator one morning, sipping my coffee, when a headline caught my eye. Ascent Digital faces class action lawsuit over data breach and misrepresented technology. My heart leaped into my throat. I clicked, my hands trembling. The article detailed a massive data breach at Ascent Digital, exposing the personal information of tens of thousands of early users. Worse, the lawsuit alleged that the core technology behind their platform was fundamentally flawed and unstable, leading to the breach and failing to deliver on promised functionalities. Investors were furious, users were demanding compensation, and the company was in crisis. I dug deeper, my earlier, resolved to avoid news about them completely forgotten. More articles, tech blogs, financial news sites. The story was everywhere. It wasn't just a data breach. It was a full-blown implosion. Investors who had poured millions into Ascent Digital were suing Chloe and David personally, alleging fraud and gross mismanagement. The lawsuit, filed in a California district court, cited internal documents that revealed they were aware of the critical security vulnerabilities and technical flaws, but chose to launch anyway, prioritizing speed too, market over user safety and product integrity, the same technical flaws I had identified in my early development phase of Connect Local, and had been working to resolve before they stole it. They had taken my incomplete work, assumed they could fix it later, and rushed it out, with catastrophic consequences. The repercussions for Chloe and David were immediate and severe. Ascent Digital was bleeding money, facing millions in potential damages from the class action lawsuit and the investor suits. Their names were being dragged through the mud in the tech press. Their reputations were in tatters. David, the CTO, was being particularly scrutinized for the technical failures. Reports surfaced that key employees were quitting in droves. The charismatic pitch that had wooed investors and users had crumbled under the weight of a fundamentally unsound product built on a foundation of deceit. Their rapid ascent had turned into a spectacular, very public crash. Reflecting on the situation was a strange experience. There was no surge of triumphant revenge, no celebratory feeling. Instead, there was a profound sense of inevitability. It wasn't my doing. I hadn't plotted their downfall or wished them. Ill, at least not after the initial raw phase of betrayal. This was a consequence of their actions. They had cut corners, compromised ethics, and built their success on stolen, unstable ground. Karma hadn't arrived as a lightning bolt from the sky, but as the natural, logical conclusion of their own choices. They prioritized greed and speed over integrity and diligence, and the structure they built inevitably collapsed. It was a stark, real-world demonstration of the principle that actions have consequences, often unforeseen by the perpetrator. It unfolded differently than I might have imagined. I had pictured them succeeding and living comfortably on my stolen idea, but the outcome, a painful reckoning, was undeniably linked to their betrayal. It wasn't an abstract force. It was the inherent instability of a foundation built on dishonesty. Witnessing their downfall, even from a distance, brought a complex mix of emotions. There was a sense of vindication, a quiet acknowledgement that their actions had not gone unaddressed by the universe, or at least by the harsh realities of business and law. But this wasn't a simple equation of, they hurt me, now they hurt. The emotional toll of the initial betrayal still lingered. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a magic wand that erased the pain or the scars. It was a decision I had made for my own healing, a release of the corrosive power of anger. But the betrayal had fundamentally altered me. Trust, once freely given, was now a precious, hard-won commodity. I found myself analyzing interactions, looking for hidden motives, a lingering vigilance that was both protective and exhausting. After I saw the news about Ascent Digital, I didn't feel a surge of joy, but a heavy sadness for what was lost. Not just the business, but the friendship, the shared dreams. The karma that hit them hard also served as a stark reminder of the pain they had inflicted. It brought back the nights I cried myself to sleep, the financial stress, the feeling of being utterly alone and wronged. The complexities of forgiveness became even clearer. I had forgiven Chloe for my peace, but her actions had consequences, far beyond my emotional state, consequences she was now facing. My forgiveness didn't absolve her of those real-world repercussions. It was a personal, internal process, separate from the external forces that were now holding her accountable. The lessons learned from this brutal experience were numerous and deeply ingrained. The most important was the fragility of trust and the devastating impact of betrayal. I learned that not everyone operates with the same values, and that some people are capable of actions that are profoundly harmful. I learned to listen to my gut instincts. Those subtle alarm bells I had initially ignored were valid warnings. I learned that protecting myself isn't selfish. It's necessary for survival and well-being. I also learned a powerful lesson about karma, not as some mystical force, but as the natural consequence of choices. Building on a foundation of dishonesty is inherently unstable. Integrity, while not always immediately rewarding, is the only sustainable path. Embracing the journey. After the betrayal and witnessing the aftermath of karma was about more than just moving on. It was about deliberate, conscious growth. It involved acknowledging the pain, allowing myself to feel it without letting it consume me, and actively working on rebuilding my sense of self and my trust in others, cautiously. It was a journey of integrating the experience, not just leaving it behind. It shaped my perspective on forgiveness as an ongoing practice, a choice I make each day to release the past and focus on the present and future. It reinforced the importance of self-care, recognizing that healing from deep wounds requires patience, kindness to myself, and surrounding myself with supportive people. It taught me that my worth isn't tied to external success or the validation of others, but to my own integrity and resilience. One of the most critical lessons I learned, perhaps even more impactful than the nature of karma, was the absolute necessity of establishing and maintaining healthy boundaries in relationships. My lack of clear boundaries with Chloe, my willingness to overlook her occasional evasiveness, my complete trust in her despite minor inconsistencies, had inadvertently created an environment where the betrayal was easier to execute. I had blurred the lines between friendship and business without establishing clear professional agreements or safeguards for my intellectual property. I had given my trust blindly, without requiring reciprocal transparency or accountability. After the dust settled, and even as I processed the karma hitting Chloe and David, I realized that simply forgiving wasn't enough to protect myself moving forward. I needed to fundamentally change how I approached relationships, both personal and professional. This meant learning to say no, clearly articulating my needs and expectations, and being prepared to enforce consequences when boundaries were crossed. It meant recognizing that my feelings and well-being were just as important as anyone else's, and that it was okay, essential even, to prioritize my own safety and peace of mind. Learning from the past involved a deep dive into recognizing red flags I had previously ignored or rationalized away. Chloe's subtle evasiveness, her tendency to put her own needs first, her occasional lack of empathy. These were all small signals I had dismissed because of our long history. The experience taught me to pay attention to those gut feelings, those little whispers of unease. It taught me that toxic relationships aren't always dramatically abusive from the start. Sometimes they erode your trust and self-worth slowly, insidiously. I learned that it's better to have a few genuinely supportive and trustworthy relationships than many superficial ones that could potentially cause harm. I became more discerning about who I let into my inner circle, and more willing to distance myself from individuals whose behavior felt inconsistent, dishonest, or disrespectful of my boundaries. Moving forward with confidence required actively practicing boundary setting. In new freelance collaborations, I implemented clear contracts, detailed scopes of work, and staggered payment schedules. In personal relationships, I learned to communicate my needs directly and respectfully, and to disengage from conversations or situations that felt draining or unhealthy. This wasn't about building walls to keep everyone out, but about building a strong, protective fence around my emotional and professional well-being. Setting boundaries felt empowering. It was a way of honoring myself, of saying, I deserve to be treated with respect and honesty. It allowed me to navigate relationships with greater clarity, confidence, and a stronger sense of self-worth, knowing that I had the tools to protect myself and to choose relationships that were built on mutual respect and trust. Ultimately, I learned that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, a release from the past's hold. True closure comes not from external events, but from finding peace within. Use the lessons learned to build a stronger, more authentic life, grounded in trust and self-worth. Move forward with hope, knowing you have the resilience to heal and thrive. Love this journey of resilience and the unexpected turn of karma? If you were gripped by Olivia's powerful story and her path to healing, show your support. Please give this video a like and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on our next compelling tale. Your engagement helps us bring more dramatic and inspiring stories like this one to life.